right, let's get things started. Wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for our last webinar of 2018. Once again, we have Mike Hartnett leading our discussion. We thank him very much for doing that. We'll let him take it away. Take it away, please, Mike.
Hello, and today we will be discussing OSHA compliance for finishing contractors and top 10 citations that were given in 2018 fiscal year by OSHA. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and spending time listening to this. This is a good presentation for helping to make sure that compliance issues don't end up costing you a lot of money. So first, let's start with the bio. Myself, Mike Hartnett. I have alphabet soup after my name, but more importantly, I am intimately familiar with the finishing trades. I spent 15 years myself as an IUPAT painter before going back to school to get my bachelor's in safety and my master's in educational technology. I'm also an OSHA outreach trainer and am a full-time safety professional working for Optimum Safety Management. So, OSHA compliance for finishing contractors. What is it? Well, I'd like to start out by telling you some of the things that FCA does to help make compliance easier. The first is the safety helpline. The safety helpline is hosted by Optimum Safety Management, and the phone calls, this phone number, ends up in a voicemail box that goes right to my phone. Okay, so I will review these inquiries. They're kept confidential, and I will answer any questions that are posted within 24 hours. You can also use that safety helpline at finishercontractors.org as an email message where you can write a detailed request for what you're looking for as far as safety help. Now, these can be compliance requests, or they can be problem-solving issues for specific jobs, specific projects with specific and unique safety requirements. So our helpline is open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. But if you leave a message, I generally get back to it as soon as possible every time I hear. In addition, I'd like to talk about the Toolbox Talk program. This is a value that FCA International offers that takes care of a lot of the ongoing training requirements that OSHA puts out there. There's over 200 Toolbox Talks. They're both in English and Spanish. Some of them specially designed specifically for the finishing trades. We also have a preset 52-week Toolbox Talk schedule available. So if you'd like to have a key for this, for the Toolbox Talk, you can contact Arlene Schonder and ask for a key to it. Okay? Okay, so OSHA. One of the reasons that OSHA is such a concern, and citations are such a concern, is their cost. For the first 20-some years of OSHA being around, their fine schedule did not change. What it was originally set to in 1971 is the same thing that it was in 2015. $7,000 for other than serious or serious citations, and $70,000 for repeat and willful citations. In 2016, that all changed. What they did was they increased it by 78% to adjust for inflation, and then they went ahead and they put in they tied it to inflation, so that every year it'll go up. And about a month from now, we'll get the information on what the 2019 fine schedule will be. And it will rise up from $12,934 for other than serious, and $129,336 for repeat and willful. It'll go up from that about 2.5% to 3%, as it will every year. So here's a question for you. A question that may come up is, what are these different designations? So OSHA used 4 designations for citations. The first one is other than serious. Other than serious are citations for violations that they believe are not serious. Serious citations are ones that can lead to harm and immediate harm and health damage. So serious citations are what the vast majority of citations will be. 75% of the citations given from 2008 to 2017 were serious violations, with 21% of them being other than serious. Generally, when I've seen other than serious, they have to do with record-keeping type issues. Then you see repeat and willful violations. Now, the repeat and willful violations, the citations cost about 10 times as much as a serious or other than serious. So how do we get repeat or willful violations? Repeat violations are when you have received a citation in the past and they come back and they find you and cite you for the same thing again. That's a repeat violation. That's a violation that you were caught doing before by OSHA. They wrote you a citation, and then in a later inspection, when they came back, they found the same issue. So those amount for about 4% of the citations that are given. The next type is willful. And a willful citation is one where OSHA says that you knew what the hazard was. You knew that you were supposed to protect the employee from it, and you decided that you didn't want to do it. You decided willfully to violate that standard. These are only about 2% of the citations that are given, but they are very damaging if they do come through. So we have some important compliance dates of things that are coming up that may very well affect you. I know that, with the glass work, we have a lot of crane standard, right? Cranes are used often for the glazers, and it's important that they're aware that there's been a change to crane standard. This is not something that is surprising or new. The crane standard was passed in 2010, but enforcement dates keeps on getting pushed back. So enforcement is going to be enforced, or is already being enforced, as of November 10th of 2018. Operators must have a certification by type of crane. The original standards said by type and capacity. There weren't any certification avenues to get that type of certification. So OSHA decided to step that back to only type of crane, which is what the crane certification organizations do certify under. So as of November 10th, there's a requirement that all crane operators that fall under substandard C have to have certification by type of crane. Previous to that, employees were allowed to evaluate their operators and determine that they were able to operate that type of crane. That is no longer acceptable. However, in February of 2019, an additional aspect of the crane standard comes into effect, where the employers are going to be required to evaluate operators to ensure that they're licensed, certified, trained, and evaluated. So this is another requirement that is put in. If you need more information on how to make sure you're compliant on those, if you're operating cranes, I know that the NCCCO has 3 different documents for how to go about making sure that your people are licensed, certified, trained, and evaluated. They have some good documents out there on ncco.org. Okay. Also, another upcoming compliance issue is electronic submission of the 300A. This also is not a big surprise. It's been in the works. We submitted 2006 documents in 17 or 2016 documents back in 2017. We submitted 2018 or 2017 documents back in 2018. This year, the enforcement date has moved up. So submission deadline is now March 2nd, and it'll continue to be March 2nd going forward. Okay, they phased it in over the last 2 years, and now it's going to be set. So anybody with 20 to 249 employees in the construction trades need to submit their Form 300A by March 2nd electronically. If you have 250 or more employees, then you're going to need to submit your 300A, your 300, and your 301. So let's look a little bit about OSHA enforcement. There's been a change over the past about 3 years ago when there's been a shift from programmed inspections to unprogrammed inspections. Now, a programmed inspection is when OSHA determines to go out and inspect a site without having a complaint or a referral to that site. And that was about 60% of the inspections performed up until 2014. But in 2015, they changed the game. They require that employers now, they changed the reporting standards so that instead of hospitalization of 3 people or a death, we now also included new issues that would trigger an employer report. Now, the loss of an eye, amputation, 1 person sent to the hospital or admitted to the hospital for other than observation, also were added to that list of when OSHA need to be notified about that. And that changed their inspection policy. You can see that by 2016, the programmed versus the unprogrammed had reversed. And 60% of the inspections were now unprogrammed. That means 60% of those inspections were off of referrals, off of reporting what had happened on site. So what that means to you is that it is pretty common when OSHA gets a report of an amputation or a loss of an eye or a person being admitted to the hospital or a fatality, that they are generally going to start an inspection. This is important that we do fulfill our requirement to report that. And there's different ways that we can go about doing that. We can call up the office, or we can go online and alert them to it through their online service. I suggest the second. It makes it more controlled transfer of information to OSHA than an open stream conversation on the phone may be. You can better control the content of the conversation when it is over email, when it is through the computer, as opposed to on the phone when a question and answer session may give OSHA perhaps more information than you want to give them, or may have you misspeak and then open up a can of worms. So let's talk about what the top 10 citations for construction are. In the 2018 fiscal year, which ran from October 2017 to September of 2018, these are the standards that received the most citations. None of these are a surprise. The vast majority of these have been on the top 10 list for many years. Although when we get to 6, we'll talk about that. That's a little different. And that has to do with the change from their program to the unprogrammed inspections. Okay, so fall protection, the duty to have fall protection. That's number 1, which is pretty common. Generally, fall protection and duty to fall protection gets that top spot on the top 10. The second one is going to be scaffolds and general requirements. Okay, this has to do with how scaffolds are set up, making sure that you're fulfilling all the requirements of the actual physical plant of the scaffold. The next is ladders, and then fall protection training. The next is PPE for eye and face protection. And then 6 is general safe and health provisions. A lot of the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. General safety and health provisions has to do with more with having programs written to protect your employees, making sure that you have a safety program and that you're taking care of the general safety and health provisions required. The reason why this one has started popping up in this year and last year is because of the change from programmed inspections that would generally go to larger employers to the unprogrammed inspections, which happen when people get injured. And not surprisingly, they find more employers in that regard that don't have the general safety and health provisions in place. Number 7 is head protection. Number 8 is hazard communication. Number 9 is scaffolds, aerial lifts specifically. And number 10 is systems, criteria, and practices for fall protection. Now, as far as construction citations, those are all pretty straightforward. But I found that we have some, we can also parse this data a little bit more finely and take it down to a level that directly affects you. So what I've done is I looked at the NAICS code 2383, which is building finishing contractors. So these are the top 10 citations for building finishing contractors. So you notice that a lot of, we have a lot of the same repeats as what construction has. Not surprising, we have the same inspectors going out and looking at it, and they're looking for a lot of the same things. But many of them came in a different order, and we had some other issues pop up on there. Now, I know I have top 10 cited on here, but I did put the 11th because I know how much concern as an industry the finishing contractors have had over respirable silica, and it's on there as number 11. So the number of citations here, or the dollar amount for the citations here, are for federal OSHA citations. This does not take into account the state plans. So once again, at the top, we have the duty to have fall protection, followed by scaffolds general requirements. Those are the same 1, 2 that we have in construction. Number 3 changes up a little bit. We have the aerial lifts as a requirement, not surprising with how much work we do at elevation in the finishing trades. Next is hazard communication. Once again, another concern that's really difficult for compliance on the finishing trades, with a number of different materials that are used and just the bulk of the SDS requirement within for those companies in the finishing trades. It's not surprising that that moves up to 4. One that we have on the finishing trades that is not on the OSHA top 10 is respiratory protection. Ladders comes in at number 6. And you can see that the dollar amount does not necessarily coincide with their rank. That's because some of these would get a lower citation value despite getting more citations. So the citation may not be for as much of a dollar amount each. So number 7, we move to fall protection training. Number 8 is lead for occupational and health environmental exposures. That's also another one that is not on the standard construction top 10, but specifically affects the building and finishing contractors. General safety and health provisions makes it in at number 9. And last but not least is scaffold training, the training requirements for scaffold. And then, of course, restful crystalline silica is number 11. And as you can see, we have the value of the citations written at $79,043. I look at our codes here, it seems this is off of 10 inspections and 34 citations written. So what do we do to protect ourselves from those? I'm going to go through each of these 10 and of the most frequently cited violations and explain what as a contractor you can do to protect yourself. So we'll start out with fall protection, right? And specifically the duty to have fall protection. It's pretty straightforward what is required in this standard, right? We need to protect against unprotected side and edges, 6 foot above. We need to protect hoist edge areas. We need to protect holes. We need to protect ramps, runways, and other walkways. We need to protect wall openings. And we need to have protection from falling objects. There are many other things that are within this standard, many other different aspects, and I have some of them listed down here below that don't necessarily affect the finishing trades. So we're not going to spend time on those, but I do want you to be aware that there are other aspects to the duty to have fall protection. So, it starts out by setting forth that you need to protect your workers with a fall protection system and what the criteria and practices are. It spells those out, whether it be a safety net system or a guardrail system, personal fall arrest system. Then you have some more specialized positioning devices, warning line systems, controlled access zones, safety monitoring systems, covers, protection from falling objects, and fall protection plans. Each of these, other than the primary 3, are very specific. The vast majority of duty to have fall protection falls under one of 3 compliance techniques. First is guardrail systems, the next is safety net systems, and then personal fall arrest systems. Guardrail systems and personal fall arrest systems being the most common. So we also need to make sure that the walking working surfaces that employees are walking on have enough strength to support the employee that's walking on them. They need to have that structural integrity. So when we're dealing with unprotected sides and edges that have a 6 foot or more fall around, we're required to use a guardrail, safety net system, or personal fall arrest system. One issue or one item that people often overlook is hoist areas. So anytime an employee is in a hoist area and there's a 6 foot or more exposure to fall, we're going to need to make sure that we're using the guardrail system or personal fall arrest system to protect those people, okay? oftentimes, and here's a demonstration of where you would have that exposure specifically in the finishing trades, is delivering the drywall. So when we have it boomed up to the third or fourth story and we have a window opening, generally that door is closed ahead of time, or there's a guardrail across, but we have to take that guardrail down to bring a material in. We need to make sure that our person is in a fall arrest system so that we can be protected from that fall. Another issue are holes. Holes are a gap or void 2 inches or more in a smaller dimension in a floor, roof, or other walking surface. I know about 9 months into my apprenticeship, a apprentice sat on a skylight to take lunch. He was an apprentice that was a day ahead of me in the apprenticeship school, and he went right through and fell about 40 foot and died. It's very important that we have these holes protected, that we have your working surfaces protected, including skylights. Okay, fall arrest system, a cover, or a guardrail system erected around the holes. They're a requirement. We also need to make sure that anytime we do cover a hole, that we have that cover secured and labeled. And additionally, that cover can take the expected, or has a structural integrity to take any expected weight that is expected to go on. We also have to worry about ramps, runways, and other walkways, and make sure that we're covering there as well. Whenever we have a walkway, we need to have a guardrail system. If there's a 6 foot or more fall to a lower level, we need to make sure that that's protected as well. Wall openings are an issue, okay? Each employee working near a wall opening, including chutes, where the outside bottom edge of the wall opening is 6 feet or more above the lower level, we need to make sure that we have guardrail protection. Okay, if the opening is less than 39 inches in height, we need to make sure that a guardrail system, safety net system, or personal fall arrest system has been put in place. We also need to make sure that we protect from falling objects. Okay, there's many ways to protect from falling objects, and this is not only your employees, but other employees that are exposed to the falling hazard created by your employees working at an elevated position. So we can do this by erecting toe boards or screens. We can use a canopy structure to keep potential objects from falling on top. And we can also barricade the area underneath where we're working and create an area that other people are not allowed to enter into. We need to make sure that we control that area as well. So our next, number 2 on the top 10 is general requirements for scaffolds. Scaffolds are going to have some pretty straightforward requirements: capacity, scaffold platform construction, criteria for supported scaffolds and criteria for suspended scaffolds, access, use, fall protection, and falling object retention. These are the topics that are covered under scaffolds. So we need to make sure that we are covering these general requirements. So FCA has a Toolbox Talks, and on these Toolbox Talks, we have very simple and straightforward direction specifying what a lot of these are. So if, as a competent person, these are all items that need to be known. And we'll discuss training on scaffolds a little bit later. But these are some of the items that it would have to be trained on. The competent person must have the knowledge and authority to correct issues, right? They need to oversee the construction of the scaffold, ensure it's being used correctly, inspect it daily, and make sure that the employees are trained. You have to be able to support 4 times as much weight as is intended, including employees, tools, equipment, and materials. Scaffold platforms need to have not more than a 1-inch gap. We need to make sure that we're fully planked. And this is an issue that I see time and again out in the field. I see half planked, and I also see, scaffolding platforms that just aren't a good enough grade of wood or are overloaded with weight. Okay, we need to make sure that our planks are extending over the edge of the supports, that we're not more than 14 inches away from the wall. And you also have the scaffold base. Scaffold base is the next section that they look at, and we need to make sure that we have a firm foundation with base plates. Okay, if mud sills are needed, they need to be secured and nailed into the base plates, or base plates need to be secured into the mud sills. Okay, you must be plumb, square, and adequately braced. Next, and the other thing that I commonly see that is off is guardrails. Okay, we are allowed to use the brace as a mid rail or top rail, but we cannot use it as both. Okay, the crossing point for a brace to be used as a top rail must be from 38 to 48 inches above the platform. With engineered scaffolding, this is generally how it is engineered, and you also have to install a mid rail. Okay, but you cannot use your cross bases as both your top rail and your mid rail. It can be one or the other. Your hazards that you have are falls, being struck by falling object, scaffold collapse, electrocution, weather conditions, means of access. These are all different things that OSHA is going to look for with your scaffolds. So how do we make sure that our people out in the field are doing this? Well, first of all, we need to make sure that our foremen are trained. We need to make sure that our superintendents are trained. And we need to make sure that there's ongoing training for all of the users that are using the scaffolding as well. So one of the pieces of scaffolding I see very often within the finishing trades is the baker. Okay. In order for utilizing a baker, the casters and wheels have to be pinned and secured. Okay, we can't just leave them so that when we're climbing on and off of baker scaffolding, oftentimes you have one side of the wheels lift up off the ground. If they're not secured, you're looking for a collapse right there. Okay, and if that happens when somebody's climbing down from it, you can have a big problem. The best practice is not to ride in the scaffolds. Okay, they have different attachments that you can use with bakers where if it has weight, it automatically locks. This is the best way to stop your employees from using it for surfing. Surfing is a common practice when I was in the field, and it is not an allowed practice. Okay. As you can see, there's a lot of information on scaffolds. Scaffold training is very important. There are a lot of specifications as far as where we need to be. It's important that those of you who are operating scaffolds are well aware of the requirements. Not just the guys that are working on them, but the superintendents that are going between jobs need to be looking at the scaffold and spotting hazards and getting them corrected right away. So our next topic is going to be number 3, scaffolds, aerial lifts. Aerial lifts are considered scaffolds and they fall underneath that standard. And they need to be designed according to ANSI, which they generally all are. And ANSI relates to vehicle mounted elevating and rotating work platforms. So these are generally called boom lifts, right? And the boom lifts need to make sure that they're used for the manufacturer intended usages. Okay, we cannot do field modifications on them. Specific requirements related to aerial lifts. You have only authorized people shall operate an aerial lift. You cannot belt off to something, to a structure or pole or equipment adjacent to the aerial lift. It's not permitted. You're only allowed to tie off inside the basket of the aerial lift. Okay, now a harness must be worn and a lanyard attached to the boom or basket when working from an aerial lift. Those are the requirements. So what do we need to do with that? We need to make sure that we know the lift. Okay, make sure there's an operator's manual on the lift itself, and review the operator's manual. Make sure that the controls are labeled and that you understand how to use it. Know the capacity of that lift. Stay away from power lines, right? And there is a sign, a warning sign on each lift that will list how far you can get to power lines. But realistically, the employees that you have may very well not be able to determine what type of voltage is on those power lines. So the rule of thumb is 10 feet. We do not get any closer to 10 feet unless we're talking about transmission level lines that are going to be above 60 feet in the air, in which case you stay farther away. So how do we find out what that voltage is? Each electric pole, each utility pole has a identification number on the bottom that you can then call when the name of the owner, utility that's an owner, you can call that utility, give them that pole number, and they will tell you what the voltage is on that specific pole. Okay. We need to make sure that we keep our feet on the floor of the aerial lift. Okay. Well, why do we need to keep our feet on the floor of the aerial lift is a question I always get from people out in the field. I'm wearing fall protection, so what does it matter if I'm standing up on the top rail? I have my fall protection. I'm protected. And what it comes down to is that that fall protection is an ejection protection. Okay, it's made to protect you from being ejected out of the basket while moving. But the guardrails themselves are the fall protection while working. It's important to know that, and why is that a requirement? Because of these forces involved in arresting a fall out of a lift. We do not want to rely on a fall arrest system out of a boom lift. The attachment of the basket to the arm the basket to the boom does not have the capacity to take a full fall and stay on and be a viable solution. Additional to that, you have a bounce in that arm that may very well end up having the person that falls out hit the ground despite being tied off. So it's very important that we stay on the ground or on the floor of the basket, and that the fall arrest system is a positioning system. You'll notice that nowhere on that lift does it have an anchor point. It has a lanyard attachment point. That's because it's not up to the capacity necessary to qualify as an anchorage point in a fall arrest system. Okay, so hazard communication is number 4 on the list. Hazard communication is important, especially for the finishing trades where you have so many different aspects to the HazCom requirement. OSHA has written that employees have the right to know and the right to understand the hazards and chemicals that they're dealing with and what precautions to take to protect themselves. So the employers must provide information about OSHA's HAZCOM requirements. They have to provide information about the chemicals the workers use, provide a HAZCOM program, provide safety data sheets and access to them, need to properly label containers so that hazards are easily identified, and provide personal protective equipment and training on its use. So I know a lot of times we have the older 1994 hazard communication labeling on much of the material that we get in. We need to make sure that we are requesting up-to-date labels from our manufacturers, from our vendors, and we need to make sure that we do secondary labeling out in the field. If we are going to be transferring material from its original container that has a label, we need to make sure we have a secondary labeling program in place so that we do not have unlabeled material. We need to make sure that we can tell what is in a container. Okay, this is especially important when we're dealing with the finishing trades. As far as your hazard communication training goes, you need to make sure that all of your employees receive initial training when they come on as to what hazards from the chemicals they will be dealing with. And we need to make sure that as new chemical hazards are brought in, that the employees are trained on them. Does this mean that if we take one material and exchange it for a different material that has different names but largely has the same hazards to the same level, that we have to retrain all of our employees? No. If we have a hazard from a material and we change it for a different material that has similar hazards at a similar level, retraining is not required. But there is an annual requirement for training. And that's one of the reasons why we suggest utilizing the Toolbox Talks. Toolbox Talks can be used for that annual refresh on hazard communication, but it's important that we document this. We need to document that training, have them sign off and keep those records. Otherwise, if we can't show OSHA that we've performed this training, then they'll say that we haven't, right? Without documentation, OSHA does not believe it's happened. So next we have respiratory protection. Now the respiratory protection is one that's specifically in the finishing trades is much higher than the other on the list. So what are the requirements as an employer? First, you need to have a written company policy, right? You need to select your respirator based on the employee hazard exposure. Before we put anybody into a respirator, we need to make sure that we have a medical examination and clearance to wear that respirator. We need to perform fit testing with the type and size respirator that the employee will be utilizing. We need to provide proper cleaning procedures. The employee must be trained in the use and limitations of the respirators. They must also be trained in inspection, storage, and the cleaning procedures. So a lot of this is also covered in the Toolbox Talk program that FCA has put together. So we need to make sure that our respirators are being used to protect against the hazards that they are effective in protecting against. How do we find out this information? By use of the SDS will tell us what type respirator cartridge needs to be protected that the employee will need for protection. So your hazard communication and your respirator program need to work hand in hand. We need to make sure that we're checking our SDSs to determine the appropriate protection level for our employees before they use products, right? We need to make sure our employees are trained in how to perform the positive and negative air pressure test to make sure that the respirator is working. We need to make sure that we're not storing that, that proper storage is required. This is something that I've seen again and again and was guilty of it when I was in the field myself. Respirators need to be cleaned after usage, and they need to be stored in a bag. Okay, respirator storage bag is a requirement. It's also important to know that fit testing, although medical clearance is required only once, fit testing is required annually, as is training. The training can be taken care of through the use of the Toolbox Talk program after the initial training is performed. Okay, but dust masks can be an effective use as well, but they are still respirators. Okay, if you do not have an exposure above the PEL and employees would like to wear a dust mask voluntarily, they may. But if you're going to choose to allow them to wear a respirator, a dust mask on a voluntary basis when there is not an exposure above the PEL, there is mandatory information that you must provide to your employee for them to sign. It's called Appendix D. It's from 1910.134, which is a respiratory protection standard. And they have it in both English and Spanish in the OSHA 1910 standards. Appendix D basically lays out what the limitations are of the equipment and how to properly use the equipment. Because if the employee is not aware of what that respirator can protect them for and can't protect them from, then they may use it in the wrong situation and expose themselves. Okay, so our next 6 is ladders. Ladders are a necessary part of our everyday work. We use it to get elevated work all the time. It's a common tool that is used almost constantly in the finishing trades. It's very simple what the requirements are. But again and again, you find ladders in poor condition. Okay, so we need to make sure that we're using the ladder correctly. For A-frame ladders, we need to make sure that they're set up and the spreader is fully extended in the open position. Right? We need to make sure that we're working facing the ladder and never away from it. And we're not utilizing those top 2 steps to stand on. Okay, for extension ladders, we need to make sure we have that 4-to-1 angle. Maintain 3 points of contact while climbing up and down. Secure the ladder to the structure to prevent accidental slipping. Extending it 3 feet over the edge of a landing when transitioning to a different level. Okay, all these are very important. Also, a requirement, no matter what type of ladder you're using, is inspection. You need to inspect it prior to use. Look for rivets and fasteners, cracks, side rails. Make sure all the components are locking and functional, or locking class are functional. Make sure all your components are functional on it. No missing feet, no rubbing, missing rubber pads, and that there's no bent or damaged rungs. Okay, if these are out of place, then you need to make sure that you tag that ladder out and remove it from the site. Okay. Next, number 7 is our fall protection training requirements. The training requirements is that each employee who might be exposed to a fall hazard needs to be trained to recognize fall hazards. The employer needs to assure that each employee has been trained as necessary by a competent person. Okay, and certification of training. Once again, where I said that we need to make sure that we document what our trainings are. So the written certification record requires that it needs to contain the employee trained, his name, the dates of the training, and the signature of the person who conducted the training, right? And the latest training certification needs to be maintained. So you don't need to maintain every training that is done on fall protection for your employee, but you need to make sure you have at the very least the latest training certification, okay? So you also may be required to retrain your employee. If the employer has reason to believe that any affected employee who's already been trained does not have the understanding and skill required, the employer is required to retrain the employee. So next we get to lead. Number 8 in the finishing trades for OSHA citations is the Occupational Health and Environmental Controls and lead. And this is a very complex and specific standard. Perhaps we can do another webinar on this another day. Those of you who are working in lead procedures need to make sure that they have an in-depth understanding of this. You need to make sure that you've done your testing. You've checked with your permissible exposure limit. You've done an exposure assessment. You know what your methods of compliance are. Your respiratory protection is all online. You have the protective work clothing and equipment, including hygiene facilities and the practices with changing areas, the showers, eating facilities, hand washing facilities required to perform this work. Medical surveillance is also a requirement with the lead standard. Okay, and medical removal protection, if somebody's medical surveillance shows their blood lead levels are above an acceptable level. We also need to make sure that we have communication of hazards. We need training for any affected employees. We need signs posted so that those who are not trained know to stay out of that area. And then the record keeping issues and ongoing observational monitoring are also important. So 9, next to last, is the general safety and health provisions. These are general safety and health provisions right there in the title. Pretty straightforward. It says that it's the responsibility of the employee to initiate and maintain programs necessary to comply with the standards, especially, that are laid out by OSHA. It also says that the employer will provide frequent and regular inspections of job sites, materials, and equipment, and that needs to be done by a competent person designated by the employer. We also need to make sure that any employee that is operating equipment or machinery is qualified by training or experience to operate that equipment and machinery. The employer has to provide PPE for each employee required to use PPE. Okay, and each failure to provide PPE can be a separate violation when it comes time to write citations. The same is true as far as training. The employer must train each affected employee in the manner required by the standard, and each failure to train an employee may be considered a separate violation. So one of the ways that you can go about protecting yourself for that is making sure that you have a good foundation, that you have a good safety program. Okay, FCA offers a safety manual for finishing industries. It's a comprehensive guide to safety standards for the finishing trades. They also have other safety forms that they have developed for their membership. So go to their website, pull that, and you can utilize that to give you the start for building a safety program if you do not have a safety program in place. And last but not least, we have scaffolds and the training requirements. Okay, so the employer is required to train each employee that performs work while on a scaffold. They need to be trained by a qualified person in the subject matter to recognize the hazards. And They need to be able to understand the procedures to control and minimize those hazards. The employee also needs to be involved, any employee that is involved in erecting, disassembling, moving, operating, repairing, maintaining, or installing a scaffold needs to be trained by a competent person to recognize the hazards in association with the work in question. Okay, and once again, the training comes up whenever the employer feels the employee lacks the skill or understanding for safe work involving the scaffolding, they need to be retrained. Okay, so when you have incidents involving scaffolding, then it's important that you take the employees that are involved in that and perform retraining. So general recommendations. General recommendations for how to protect yourself within compliance starts with hazard awareness. When you already have a safety program in place, you need to make sure that your leaders out there in the field have the ability to assess hazards. And that's really what the OSHA 30-hour training is designed for. It is a hazard awareness training. And I'd suggest that you have your foremen, your superintendents, and your estimators go to an OSHA 30 training. When I suggest this for estimators, a lot of people say there's no reason for estimators. They never go out there. And that's true, but they do have to estimate how much time will be taken for doing the work. And many times in the field, you find that estimators just did not give enough time for safety. If they have a better understanding of what the safety requirements are, what the hazards are out in the field, they can do a better job of estimating, making sure that your bottom line comes out better for each of your projects. In addition, the OSHA 10 for all tradesmen. Okay, this hazard awareness is very important for tradesmen as well. It's also important that you utilize a Toolbox Talk program. Okay, not necessarily the one from the FCA, but the FCA does have a good one. This is important to have ongoing training and record that training, document it. Document that you what topics were discussed, and have sign-in sheets, and keep those sign-in sheets. So when OSHA says, when's the last time that we've had training on this? That 5-minute discussion can be training. Can it be competent person training? No. It won't teach somebody how to use a scaffold. But as ongoing education and ongoing training to refresh that memory, it's very important. And it also documents training for OSHA. And last but not least, I'd like to say that you need to invest in safety. Okay? National Safety Council states that over 60% of the CFOs in their studies reported that each $1 invested in injury prevention returned $2 or more. And over 40% said that productivity was the greatest benefit of an effective workplace safety program. Okay, on the right here, you see a picture of a PDF you can pull from the National Safety Council's website. It's called Journey to Safety Excellence. And what it is a business case for investment in safety. So if you're a safety manager, a safety director, or a safety coordinator, and you need a lever to help explain to the owner of your business why they need to invest in safety, these have the tools to help make that case, make that business case on safety being an investment that has a return on investment. So I'll wrap it up here with the Toolbox Talk program. Make sure you're aware of that. It is a valuable tool. You can ask for a key from Darlene Schonder. Also, the safety helpline is a good option if you have a question specific to a project or even a general question. Reach out. FCA has put this resource together to help its membership so that you guys can be protected and that your employees can be protected. Have any questions?
I don't have a question, Mike. This is Bob Weaver. I have a comment. Really want to thank you for this. Wow, what a program! 1 hour, and you really covered the criteria to help our contractors stay in compliance with those top 10 violations. So I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you very much. I tried to make sure that it was as specific as possible to really work towards your membership and what the finishing trades are all about. Protect the guys out there in the field.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for this. And that was a great point to end on. This is, we appreciate the efforts in you trying to tailor it to the finishing industry and our contractors, and that's what it's all about. So thank you all very much. This will be like we said, this will be our last webinar for the holidays. So everybody have a happy and safe holidays, and we'll definitely be back in touch next year. Thank you so much.